Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is June the 17th, 2024. It has been 3,794 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 118 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 115 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened over the weekend. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. There are many map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. The lack of significant drone or missile attacks on Ukraine from June the 14th to the 16th indicates that Russia is preparing another larger attack within the next 3 to 5 days. 2. In our assessment, autocrat Vladimir Putin has miscalculated the shift in posture by the NATO alliance and its allies, resulting in open talks of changing NATO's nuclear posture after months of direct threats by the Russian leader. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 3. Russia is setting conditions to commit further acts of aggression in Europe. 4. Russia's sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has destroyed 80% of its combined thermal and power plant capacity, is a continuation of Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court on March the 5th. 5. The quantity of artillery ammunition available to Ukrainian frontline units is reaching a level where the stabilization of existing defensive lines is improving across Ukraine. 6. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March the 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs is encouraging escalation. 7. Autocrat Putin has started the largest purge of the Russian Ministry of Defense led by the FSB since Joseph Stalin's 1936 to 1938 purge. 8. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Russia did not carry out significant attacks using cruiser ballistic missiles or Shahed-136 one-way drones over the weekend. On Saturday, an unspecified number of Russian missiles were shot down near Kremenchuk in the Poltava Oblast. Local officials reported there was no damage and no injuries. On Friday, in the Kharkiv Oblast, Russia attacked Glushkivka, striking a kindergarten. A 58-year-old woman was killed. The next day, the village of Bohuslavka was shelled, destroying several homes and wounding 1 civilian. On Sunday, a daytime bombing by the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, struck the village of Pisk-Radkivsky, wounding 3 civilians, including a 13-year-old girl and a 33-year-old pregnant woman. Russian Grad rockets also struck the village of Kurylivka, wounding 1. In the Donetsk Oblast, the village of Ulakly was attacked by Smerch rockets armed with cluster munitions, a violation of international humanitarian law. 3 civilians were killed and 5 more, aged 27 to 63, were wounded. The VKS bombed the village of Nova Poltavka with a Fab 1500 UMPK glide bomb, wounding 7 civilians, including 2 children aged 4 and 7. 2 adults are in hospital in serious condition. In the Kherson region, a Russian first-person view, or FPV, one-way drone struck a civilian car in Osokorivka, killing the driver. On Sunday, Russia attacked 7 villages and settlements and the city of Kherson, wounding 2. In the Sumy Oblast, a Russian first-person view one-way drone struck a 20-passenger bus in Esmany. At least 3 civilians were wounded. Here is today's action report. Over the weekend, Russia carried out at least 318 assaults, including 88 confirmed clashes through Sunday evening. On June the 15th, the 7-day moving average increased to 105, near the same level as April the 28th. While the 7-day moving average is climbing again, the number of daily attacks continues to support the Russian spring-summer offensive ended on June the 11th. Now for the assessment of the day from our analyst team. Russia's mobility capabilities on the battlefield continue to degrade and are likely contributing to the inability to turn tactical gains into operational success. The number of pictures and videos showing Russian troops using converted farming equipment, motorcycles and all-terrain vehicles for assaults, logistics and medevac is increasing. An analyst who goes by Jumpy on Twitter, also known as X, has shared many satellite images of Russian storage, maintenance and refurbishment depots, tracking the amount of visible reserve equipment remaining. Recent satellite images showed that the number of reserve BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles, that's IFVs, has decreased to 1,200, with 300 removed from the reserve in the last 4 months. Almost 2,800 additional hulls have already been stripped or are so degraded they likely can't be restored. If the rate of attrition continues, Russia will be out of reserve BMP-1s by June 2025. It's a similar situation for the MTLB Armored Personnel Carrier, or APC, with up to 70% of the available reserve removed from storage. Russia is also losing its modern main battle tanks at a much faster rate than they can be refurbished out of storage. Since February the 24th, 2022, Russia has lost 143 T-90 tanks in various configurations and 150 T-62 medium-duty tanks. The T-62 belongs in a museum, not on a 21st century battlefield in the service of a country that still thinks it's a superpower. The T-62 is easier and faster to restore due to its 1950s design, and Russia is likely installing the turrets for T-90M MBTs on refurbished T-72 hulls. Additionally, the documented Russian losses of T-80 BVM MBTs are double the number that were in active service in 2022. The number of Russian T-80s observed and confirmed destroyed continues to decline, suggesting they are becoming extinct. Currently, Russia is producing new T-90M MBTs, but it remains unclear if they are casting hulls and barrels. They are also producing a significant number of BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, but not enough to offset losses. Over the weekend, almost 100 world leaders pledged not just continued support for Ukraine, but to provide everything needed for victory. Russia's offensive was already slowing. Now, ammunition from the Czech Republic-led initiative will be on the front lines within days, according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Czech Republic, Jan Lipavsky. This comes at a time when Ukrainian tubed and barrel units are universally reporting an increase in their ammunition supply. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's attempt to derail the Peace in Ukraine summit and his release of a ridiculous peace plan while making renewed nuclear threats suggests that the Kremlin knows the tide is turning. If the leadership in the United States remains unchanged in November, time will no longer be on the Kremlin's side. Now, let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. There are a lot of updates, and this is a good time to open up the war map on a second device. There's a link in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, we begin in the Lipty-Vovchansk area of operation, or EO. Fighting continued in Vovchansk, where Ukrainian forces have made significant advances in the central district. Chechen Akhmat released a video allegedly striking Ukrainian positions with drone-delivered IEDs. Geolocation of the video showed that Ukrainian forces were west of Soborna Street and reached Druzhby Street, north of the city park. Videos released between June the 13th and the 15th by the Russian Ministry of Defense showed the VKS bombed similar areas. Based on the new information, we adjusted the line of conflict and the grey area. On May the 20th, as Ukrainian forces started to push Russian troops back from the Vovcha River, a group of 200 to 400 Russian soldiers occupied the machine aggregate plant on the north bank. On June the 1st, the Russian garrison fell into a technical encirclement as Ukrainian forces retook the area south of Torgova Street. As Ukrainian forces continued to advance north, the Russian force in the plant compound fell into a full encirclement. Over the past week, there were several attempts by Russian forces from the north to breach Ukrainian defensive lines and for the Russian garrison in the plant to execute a breakout. None of the attempts were successful. On Saturday, the Ukrainian Air Force bombed the plant using GBU-39JDAM glide bombs, while Russian forces bombed the apartment buildings north of the city park. Russian sources reported up to 400 troops are at the machine aggregate plant, while Ukrainian sources put the number at 200. Assessment: based on the best information available on Sunday, the situation for the Russian garrison is deteriorating. It is the largest group of troops surrounded by either combatant since April 2022. Geolocated videos confirmed that Ukrainian forces made additional gains in the central part of Glboke, with the Ukrainian BTR-4E IFV destroyed by a Lancet one-way drone on the edge of the village center. A Russian BMP-2 IFV was destroyed northeast of the village. Based on the new intelligence, the line of conflict was adjusted. In the Belgorod region of Russia, the Birds of Magyar continued to interdict Russian logistics using FPV one-way drones, striking Golovchina. In the Kupiansk EO, Russian forces failed to advance in the direction of Petropavlivka from Vilshana, and attacks in the direction of Stepovanovo-Selivka were repulsed. In the village of Pristin, a Russian Lancet UAV destroyed an AN-TPQ-37 counter-battery radar. In occupied Pokrovsk, that's in the Luhansk Oblast and at least 22 kilometers from the known line of conflict, the Ukrainian 43rd Mechanized Brigade destroyed a Russian self-propelled howitzer with an FPV one-way drone. In the Svatovo EO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their attempt to advance back into the northern part of Berestovo using light infantry, suffered heavy losses and retreated in disarray. Russian attempts to advance from occupied Novovodane in the direction of Druzhelyubivka and Grekivka ended in failure. In occupied Kovalivka, the Azov Brigade destroyed a fuel depot and a command post using FPV one-way drones. In the Kremennaio, the Azov Brigade destroyed military control of the Serebryanka forest south of occupied Dibrova and Kuzmina to the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Some of the Ukrainian advances of up to 1,500 meters happened up to 30 days ago, and we honored operational security. The line of conflict was unchanged, but the grey area was reduced to the access road that runs east of the Serebryanka electrical substation. Let's talk about the Donbass and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Siversky EO, Russian forces made another attempt to advance in the direction of Verkhnyokamyensk from Zolotarivka, suffered losses and retreated to their defensive positions. A geolocated video showed that Russian forces have made additional gains toward Rozdolivka, reaching the southern edge of the village. Based on the new information, the map and grey area were adjusted. In the Kostiantynivka EO, heavy fighting continued in the canal district of Chasiv Yar. A geolocated video showed Ukrainian troops operating in the mapped grey area just west of the line of conflict, confirming there have been no additional Russian advances over this weekend. The situation remains extremely difficult. Oh, by the way, anytime I say here's a geolocated video, it's linked in our almost daily situation report for our subscribers. For more information, you can check out the podcast description. South of occupied Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces liberated the center of Klishchiivka and were operating in the open by the destroyed church. Based on the new intelligence, we removed the no man's land and adjusted the line of conflict. The Ukrainian 28th Mechanized Brigade was engaged in heavy fighting southeast of Andriivka and on the edges of occupied Kurdyumivka. Near occupied Vershina, Ukrainian drones attack Russian ground lines of communication, that's a G-lock or supply line, destroying 2 UAS-452 loaves. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces carried out at least 36 assaults on Sunday in the Avdiivka AO. Fighting continued in Novoalexandrivka with no change in the situation. The situation in Sokil is unclear, with conflicting reports of fighting in or on the eastern edge of the village. Northeast of Sokil, a geolocated video showed 2 Russian BDRM-2 amphibious armored scout cars, which first entered service in 1962, destroyed by FPV one-way drones. One of the scout cars was carrying a squad of dismounts on its roof. The Ukrainian 47th and 110th Mechanized Brigades attacked Russian G-locks with FPV one-way drones, destroying tanks and armored vehicles before they could reach the line of conflict. Heavy fighting also continued east of Yevgenivka and west of Umanska. Russian mercenary blogger Gonzo reported fighting was ongoing east of Yasnobrodivka and between Netailova and Karlivka. Yes, Pegov made another claim that Russian troops made a wet crossing without evidence. Are they going to and fro? Fighting continued in the Vuhledar AO. Russian forces advanced 1 street deeper into Krasnohorivka, almost reaching the memorial of Taras Shevchenko. Based on the new information, the line of conflict and grey area was adjusted. We remain unsure about which combatant controls Georgiivka. There has been no evidence of Russian troops occupying the settlement or a flag raising. East of Pobeda, the Ukrainian 116th Territorial Defense Brigade destroyed an increasingly rare T-80 BVM MBT. Further south, heavy fighting continued in Paraskoviivka, where the situation remains extremely difficult. In occupied Olenivka, a Russian 2S-4 Tulpan 240mm self-propelled mortar was destroyed by a rocket fired by HIMARS, eliminating the entire crew. It was the 50th 2S-4 confirmed destroyed. South of occupied Novomykhailivka, a possible Russian T-54B medium-duty tank and an abandoned BMP-3 IFV with Russian troops hiding under it were destroyed by FPV one-way drones. If the tank is a T-54B, it would be the oldest Russian tank destroyed in combat. A second BMP-3, which was disabled in the same area, was also destroyed. Based on the geolocation of both videos, we adjusted the line of conflict toward Novomykhailivka. Russian forces attempted an armored assault from occupied Volodymyrivka. The Ukrainian 72nd Mechanized Brigade forced the Russian column to retreat, destroying 1 tank, 4 IFVs and an MTLB APC. In occupied Mykilske, Russian photojournalist Nikita Tsitsagi died at the ruins of the St. Nicholas Church. Tsitsagi was working on a report when the area was shelled. The church is located less than 200 meters from the Russian forwardmost line of friendly troops and was destroyed in October 2023. On Saturday, Russia launched significant attacks in Vremivka AO, where fighting continued into Sunday. Russian attacks on Urozhaine were repulsed. West of occupied Staromayorsk, Russian forces were attempting to advance in the direction of Babas Hill. The area is the top of a ridgeline that overlooks Neskuchne, Storozhove and Makarivka and its occupation would enable Russian forces to establish fire control on the Ukrainian geolog between Velika Novosilka and Staromayorsk.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
We've reached the part of the Russia-Ukraine war where Ukraine is launching more drone strikes on Russia than Russia is launching on Ukraine. In the Belgorod region, Ukraine struck a Russian ammo depot, causing a large fire. The ammunition was stored in a civilian area, and at the time of publication, there was no information about casualties. Ukrainian drones carried out raids on Tikhoretsk in the Krasnodar Krai and the Voronezh region. There were reports of explosions and active air defenses, but no damage. In Rostov-on-Don in the Rostov Oblast, an electrical substation exploded, knocking out power to parts of the city. It is unknown if the outage was due to a drone strike, sabotage, or technical failure. Over the weekend, ISIS terrorists and other prisoners at the pretrial detention center in Rostov-on-Don rioted, taking guards as hostages. Russia claimed the situation was brought under control, with 6 prisoners killed. Pictures of the aftermath showed that some of the prisoners had been handcuffed and extrajudicially executed. Near the city of Saratov, an underground gas storage facility exploded, causing a massive fire. Forestry workers had reported a strong smell of gas for a month and claimed that Russian officials did not respond to their warnings because, of course not. In Lipetsk, Ukrainian drones attacked the Novolipetsk metallurgical plant, the largest in Russia. The governor claimed all drones were shot down and there was no damage. We'll wait for satellite images to get the real story. New satellite images showed that last week's drone attack on the Morozovsk military airfield, where all drones were shot down, destroyed 2 Su-34 multi-role fighter planes and likely heavily damaged 2 more. Using parked airplanes to intercept drones is very innovative. Here is my Theaterwide update. There is a lot of news today. Hungary lifted its veto blocking the start of accession talks for Ukraine into the European Union, paving the way for the first meeting with Ukraine and Moldova on June the 25th. After Brussels announced the news, Charles Michel, president of the European Council, tweeted, "Look forward to the first intergovernmental conferences with both. We keep our promises and we will support you along the way to membership." On Friday, the day before the Peace in Ukraine summit in Switzerland, autocrat Putin announced his own peace proposal. It called for Ukraine to unconditionally withdraw all troops from the illegally annexed Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts and surrender Crimea. Ukraine would have to stop its accession to NATO and end all outside assistance from any other nation. Only then would peace negotiations begin. Ukraine would then need to remain neutral, non-aligned to any alliance, and vow not to start a nuclear weapons program. It also required all Western sanctions to be lifted by other nations. No one outside of Russia and its supporters took this seriously, and it doesn't even align with the Chinese peace plan that Beijing claims 26 nations support. On Saturday, government leaders and representatives met at the Peace in Ukraine summit. Addressing the assembly, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said, quote, "Ukraine never wanted this war. The only one who wanted it was Putin. But in any case, the world is stronger. In Switzerland, it was possible to unite 101 countries of the world. And even among those who did not join the summit, the majority are in favor of the Ukrainian peace formula. There is no Russia here today. Why? Because if Russia were interested in peace, there would be no war. If he wants to end the war, why does he spend all the money on weapons? Why did he put the economy on a war footing? All the money from oil and gas goes directly to militarization. Putin wants to continue the war." Unquote. It was the largest diplomatic effort by Ukraine since the country declared independence in 1991, with leaders from around the world speaking out in support of Ukraine. Here is Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas.
There was hope back then, and some are also hoping now, that territorial concessions to the aggressor would bring peace. History has proved that giving up territory for peace has too often led and will lead to further aggressions. To achieve peace, we will have to learn from our own mistakes. Failure to do so would bring a colossal cost in human lives across the globe.
The President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, said, quote, "This war is imperial and colonial in its nature. The Kremlin intends to enslave the Ukrainian people and their children and use Ukraine's resources, destroy their culture, and deprive Ukraine of their right to freely choose its development path and security arrangements." The Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, said, quote, "If President Putin's proposal is, we are willing to have a peace negotiation if Ukraine recognizes the invasion of Ukraine and gives up the occupied parts, doesn't seem particularly effective to me as a proposal." It was widely reported that Meloni said that at next peace summit would be to discuss Russia's surrender terms, which was a misquote. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak.
I recall my first visit to Kyiv when I saw the explosive devices that departing Russian soldiers has placed in children's toys and footballs. There can be no justification for that. There can be no justification for escalating nuclear rhetoric. There can be no justification for disrupting food supplies to tens of millions of vulnerable people. Now, there will be, of course, a diversity of views around this table, but I commend and thank everyone for their participation here today, demonstrating that you all seek a genuine peace to this conflict. Because Putin has no interest in a genuine peace. He's launched a sustained diplomatic campaign against this very summit, ordering countries to stay away. And we should ask, why does Russia feel that they are so threatened by a summit discussing the basic principles of territorial integrity, food security, and nuclear safety?
The delegates, which included 57 heads of state, agreed on a joint resolution that declared the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant should operate under the control of Ukraine and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Ukraine needs access to all of its seaports on the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Food security cannot be used as a weapon by Russia. All prisoners of war must be exchanged in an all-for-all format. All illegally detained civilians, as well as illegally deported Ukrainian children, must be returned to Ukraine. All countries must reaffirm their commitment to the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states within internationally recognized borders. Peace can only be achieved through dialogue between all parties. 80 countries, including Ukraine, signed the declaration, along with 4 government agencies. Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Indonesia, South Africa, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates refused to sign. It was widely reported that Brazil also did not sign, but they only participated in the summit as an observer. Ukraine introduced a new uncrewed surface vessel, the Stalker Mark V. An outboard motor powers the drone, which has a top speed of 75 km per hour and carries a 150 kg warhead. Ukraine also debuted a new land-based one-way robot called the ARK-1. The overland drone has a top speed of 45 km per hour and a range of 20 km. It can be used for logistics to deliver small arms, ammunition, medical supplies, or other material, or be armed with explosives. On Sunday at the Peace Summit, Canada announced it was providing Ukraine with a $38.1 million humanitarian aid package. Late last week, the Minister of Defense of Canada, Bill Blair, announced that he had signed the letter of intent for the Ukraine Defense Contact Group's Armor Capability Coalition. Canada has been one of the most reliable providers of infantry mobility vehicles to Ukraine, with Rochelle building over 1,000 Senator IMVs. Germany confirmed the delivery of a new military aid package to Ukraine. The list is too long to include in today's podcast, but it is available in our almost daily situation report. There's a link in the podcast description and a 7-day free trial. Germany also pledged to provide Ukraine with an unspecified number of modified Leopard 1A5 tanks with modern Skyranger 35mm anti-aircraft turrets to provide short-range air defense. Vice President of the United States Kamala Harris announced that Ukraine would receive $1.5 billion in aid to support energy infrastructure, address humanitarian needs, and bolster civilian security, including the protection of the border. The commander of the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov, Colonel Denis Prokopenko, thanked the United States for ending the embargo on providing weapons to the military unit.
The Russian propaganda-induced ban that has been in place since 2017 has been overcome. I thank the United States of America for their attentive review of this issue and the right decision which will qualitatively strengthen our unit and with it the entire defense and security forces of Ukraine.
Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine Alexander Litvinenko warned that if the Russian occupation army fails in the war against Ukraine, dictator Vladimir Putin may order the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Despite the fact that the West considers Putin's threats to be a bluff, Litvinenko warned that no scenario can be ruled out. Shortly before Litvinenko's statement, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said that the alliance was negotiating to increase the readiness posture of its nuclear weapons. Quote, "The bloc must show its nuclear arsenal to the world in order to send a direct message to its enemies." Stoltenberg said that alliance members were holding talks on removing missiles from storage and bringing them to a state of combat readiness, calling for transparency as a means of deterrence. Quote, "I'm not going to go into the operational details of how many nuclear warheads should be in combat stock and how many should be in storage, but we have to consult on those issues. That's exactly what we're doing." Unquote. Really quick assessment from the analysts team that wrote this at 3:30 in the morning. The United States government and military officials have repeatedly stated that there would be no change in nuclear posture unless Russia increased its readiness. Something must have changed for Stoltenberg to declare a potential change in nuclear readiness. No, you don't need to start digging your backyard bunker. For instance, I don't have one. In a sign of growing tensions at the Peace Summit in Switzerland, President of France Emmanuel Macron openly carried the so-called nuclear football in what was viewed as a thinly veiled reminder directed at autocrat Putin that France is a nuclear power. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.